the Nevada Department of Wildlife, and with me is Julie Gabrielson, and she is a conservation educator with the Nevada Department of Wildlife. Julie will be helping me with monitoring everyone's questions and making sure everything goes smoothly today. Before we get started, let's go over a few ground rules. So I want to thank you for joining the Nevada Department of Wildlife for a conservation education program. This is a family program and is rated PG. Profanity or inappropriate behavior will not be tolerated in the chat or Q&A box. All questions in the chat box or Q&A box should be on topic, and failing to follow these guidelines will result in being muted in the chat or Q&A box or being removed from the live stream. All right, so today we are going to be going over Nevada's living state symbols, and we are going to be covering and defining what a living state symbol is, what Nevada's 9 living state symbols are, and we're going to go over what our state reptile is, what Nevada's state mammal is, our state grass, state fish, state tree. We actually have 2 state trees, so we're going to go over both of those, and what our state bird is, our state insect, and our state flower. And then at the very end, I'll answer any questions that you might have. And during the presentation, I would love it if you could let me know which of these state symbols you have seen and where you have seen these. It's always interesting kind of getting a perspective on what people in Nevada see, and maybe even what people in other states might see. All right, so what is a state symbol? Well, a state symbol is something that's recognized as having cultural and natural value to the state or country. So these are all symbols that are very important and often recognizable by the people living within that state. All right, so I can't really talk about our 9 living state symbols without first talking about our 4th grade program called Know Your Nevada. This is a great program where we get to interact with students in 4th grade all throughout Nevada, and we teach about conservation and some of our living state symbols, which are our state animals and our state plants. So our first lesson, we go over our living state symbols, what a living state symbol is, and then we cover where these state symbols are in their habitats and which habitats they live within. And we break this program up into 3 lessons over a 3-week period. So we go over all the basic information during the first lesson. So we cover what our state mammal is, our state flower, and so on. And then in our second lesson, we talk about the adaptations that each of these living state symbols has in order to live within the habitats that they live within. So we go over behavioral as well as physical characteristics that each of these animals and plants has. And then in our third lesson, we talk about some conservation issues. And this is actually the lesson where the students get to vote on which of the living state symbols they want to talk about. And then we focus on that animal or plant. And then we talk about some of the conservation issues that they have within Nevada. And then we kind of get them to think like a biologist and come up with their own solutions. And we also give them kind of a broad range of solutions that they might want to implement to increase these populations and to solve some of these conservation issues. So this is a very interactive program where we definitely encourage students to participate. Even during our second lesson, we actually have them create their own habitat and then an animal that has specific adaptations for living within that habitat. So it's a really great program. I love teaching it, and students really seem to get to enjoy the lessons and really get inspired by what we teach them and kind of go out on their own afterwards. So it's a great program where we get to teach students about their state as well as the biodiversity within it. All right, so today we are going to be talking about our state insect, which is the vivid dancer damselfly, our state reptile, which is the desert tortoise. We have 2 state trees. The first tree that we have, or one of our state trees, is the bristlecone pine tree, and then our state bird, which is the mountain bluebird, other state tree, which is the single leaf pinyon pine, our state fish, which is the Lahontan cutthroat trout, our state grass, which is Indian rice grass, our state flower, which is sagebrush, and then our state mammal, which is the desert bighorn sheep, which is probably one of our most recognizable state symbols that we have here in Nevada. So we're going to cover each of these, and I'm going to go over specific information for each of these. All right, so first off, let's talk about our state reptile. Now, our state reptile is the desert tortoise. This was designated as our state reptile in 1989. It is considered threatened, and it was decided on that it was threatened by the Endangered Species Act, and it is protected throughout its range, especially in Nevada. So you can't go up to these animals and touch them. If you do see them in their habitat, you want to leave them alone. They often will urinate if they get stressed or if somebody picks them up. So we don't want to do that, especially since they live in a dry environment where water is pretty scarce and they might be experiencing drought in that environment. All right, so let's cover some fun facts about the desert tortoise. So first off, it is the largest native land tortoise in North America and the largest reptile in the Southwest. It lives years, so pretty old around how long we live. And they travel at speeds of up to 0.3 miles per hour. So this is one of the reasons why they really rely on the resources and the water and food that's available to them within that area, because it's very difficult for them to travel, and they're not going to travel much further than their surroundings. So they really rely on those resources being stable and having that healthy habitat. Now let's talk about some of the characteristics that the desert tortoise has. First off, the top part of their shell, or the brown carapace, is highly domed. It also is kind of flattened at the top, and they have prominent growth lines. Now you can see on their shell, they have kind of indents and these grooves, and these are all built up of keratin, and you can actually calculate the age of the desert tortoise by these growth lines. It's much more difficult to kind of calculate the age of this animal just because it's difficult to count these lines, but you can get an average age of the desert tortoise by looking at these lines. So it's kind of like tree rings, like just it develops and grows with each year. Now the bottom of the shell, or the plastron, is a yellowish color. The limbs, tails, and head are thick and scaly, and they will often retract into their shell, especially if they get scared. Now let's talk about size. Now, of course, as hatchlings, they start off very small, and then once they are adults, the carapace length, which is the upper section of their shell, will be about 7.9 to 14 inches in length. They will weigh around 10 to 17 pounds as adults. And the males tend to be larger, and you can kind of distinguish the males versus the females by looking at their chin gland, which you can see in this middle picture. It has that chin gland, and then you can look at their gular shields, which is the bottom bony portion of their shell, which is protruding underneath their head. So you can look at those two things and kind of distinguish the sex of the desert tortoise by looking at these characteristics. Now, the habitat and range, they do stay in low desert habitats, so mostly in the southern region of Nevada, and their range extends from the southwestern states south to Mexico, and these southwestern states include Nevada, California, Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico. The desert tortoise has many important adaptations. Adaptations are the behavioral or physical characteristic that allows that animal or plant to live within that certain habitat or environment that they do inhabit. So adaptations are very important, and each animal and plant is going to have their own unique adaptation based on what their needs within that environment. So the desert tortoise, their diet consists of grasses, shrubs, cacti, and wildflowers. These are all things that live in low desert habitats, which means that they store a lot of their water because they will experience periods of drought where there is no precipitation or rain and there's no fresh water source. So they need to be able to store that water for a long period of time in case it's too dry for their surroundings and they don't have that precipitation. So this is a very, very important food source for the desert tortoise. This is where it gets a lot of its water, especially since it can't travel very quickly or very far. So it needs to gain water from the resources that are available to it. And this is an easy way for it to get its water. Another important adaptation is you can see their legs. They create the perfect sort of shovel, and they will dig small basins with those legs, and they will even dig burrows. And these burrows are where they spend a lot of their life, and it allows them to escape from the heat. It also allows them to conserve their resources, so conserve their food and their water. And whenever they do dig these basins, the basins are in order to capture water. So whenever it rains, it's able to capture its water that way and get some fresh water. So this is a very important adaptation for it to have. It also has a very tough shell, and this is important for protection against predators. However, the hatchlings, whenever they are still developing their shell, they will have a very, very soft shell. And often predators will take advantage of this. And we've seen this with ravens. Ravens will often puncture the top portion of the shell and eat the animal that way. So hatchlings are very vulnerable to predation. But whenever they get older and are adults, they don't have to worry about that as much because they have that hard protective layer. However, the hatchlings, only about 2% of hatchlings reach adulthood, but they do lay a lot of eggs just in case. So that way some of them will survive into adulthood. Now they will often store water in their bladder as well. We can kind of think of it as recycling their water throughout their body. They are able to tolerate high levels of urea in their blood to prevent them from losing moisture through urination. So they have this very important adaptation that allows them to conserve their water. And they can go for almost a year without needing fresh water. So they do a very good job of conserving their resources and not really needing much. Next, we have our state mammal. Now, this is the desert bighorn sheep. I include the scientific names just in case you want to do some research on these animals afterwards. Sometimes some of these animals and plants, they will have multiple common names. So if you want to be more specific and more accurate with your information, you can always type in those scientific names. And often a lot more resources will be available to you whenever you do that. All right, now just a reminder, if you have seen any of these plants or animals, I definitely encourage you to put in the comment section where you have seen these and which of these you have seen. All right, and so the desert bighorn sheep was designated as our state mammal in 1973. It is considered endangered, but it's found in Nevada's mountainous deserts and as well as our low desert environments and our sagebrush and pinyon juniper habitats. So it can be found all over, and it's really adaptable to different conditions and can move very quickly. Now, some fun facts about the desert bighorn sheep. First off, its horn size, probably one of its most recognizable features. This is actually a symbol of rank, especially for the males. The males are the ones with that C-shaped horn that kind of curls, whereas the females have much shorter horns that don't really curl. So the males, their horns will keep growing, and they can get to be about 30 pounds. But the older desert bighorn sheep are going to have the bigger horns typically. Now the females, they are called ewes. The males are called rams. So if you see these names, it's just referring to the sex of these animals. Also, another important thing that they're known for is their head-to-head combat. Often they will butt heads, especially the males. They will often do this during the rutting season between July and October. And it's actually estimated that rams may butt heads at a combined speed of approximately 30 miles per hour. So they're pretty tough animals, and they're pretty strong whenever they are fighting each other. They can also live up to 15 years in the wild. Now, the desert bighorn sheep, they have, of course, those large brown horns. And just like the desert tortoise, you can actually calculate the age of these animals by looking at their growth rings or annuli rings. Their first ring will develop once they reach sexual maturity, and then every year onward, it will grow a new ring. So you can calculate the age of these animals based on these annuli or growth rings. Now, they also have very muscular bodies. They have brown fur, and then they have white fur around their muzzle, rump, and belly. Now, they will reach a length of 5 feet, and the height at their shoulders ranges from 38 to 42 inches. And males will tend to be larger at around 140 to 180 pounds, whereas the females range from 90 to 150 pounds. So they can get fairly large. All right, now habitat and range. So the desert bighorn sheep inhabits low desert, sagebrush and pinyon juniper, and montane habitats within Nevada. And besides the southern region of Nevada, populations exist in Arizona, Southeast California, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Texas, and Mexico. And before westward expansion, you can kind of see that the population was believed to be in the tens of thousands, fairly large and fairly spread out. However, their population really started decreasing, especially in 1960. And this was due to excessive hunting and competition, and even some diseases that were brought in by domesticated animal like sheep. So we started seeing pneumonia in the desert bighorn sheep from these domesticated animals and this livestock. But you can see that their population really decreased, and this was when some conservation initiatives were put in place to try and reestablish these populations in their habitat and try and reduce the amount of clustering and fragmentation that you can see in the 1960 map. So the population has increased since then. You can kind of see that they're more spread out throughout their habitat, which is a great thing to see. However, their population could get a little bit bigger, but it is great to see that their population has increased. All right, so some adaptations that the desert bighorn sheep has is that they have those large horns, and this is very valuable for protection as well as for fighting. Now, they do have some predators, including the mountain lions, coyotes, as well as bobcats. So these horns are a great for protecting themselves against these predators, as well as for fighting against other males. Females don't tend to fight each other quite as much as the males during that rutting season. Now they also have padded cloven hooves, and these kind of act like suction cups whenever they are climbing those steep rocky areas and those hard to reach areas. So they really need to be sure-footed, and these cloven hooves, which you can see in the picture, they really provide that stability for them. They also have great eyesight for looking out for food, as well as for looking out for predators. And they often will be found resting in shade and caves when it does get too hot, because they can be found in those low desert habitats, and they need to be able to cool off quickly. So their body temperature can actually fluctuate a few degrees. And often with humans, this means that we're sick or there's something wrong. However, with the desert bighorn sheep, this is often just a normal part of life. And they often will pant to try and cool down through their respiratory tract, and they can actually sweat. So they do have functioning sweat glands. However, this isn't believed to be quite as effective at cooling down as panting is. Now, they are able to lose up to 30% of their fluid weight, which is actually more than a camel. So they're very well adapted to living in those desert conditions and those dry conditions. Most animals are believed to only be able to lose about 10% of their body weight in fluid without having serious dehydration consequences. So they're very well adapted to dry conditions. Next, we have our state grass, which is the Indian rice grass. This was established as our state grass in 1977. Some other common names that you might hear it be called include Indian millet and sandgrass. Now, some fun facts about Indian rice grass is that it was once a food source of Native Americans in Nevada, but it now provides food for wildlife as well as for range livestock. So it's very valuable grass to have here in Nevada. And it's also Utah's state grass. So it's not just important to us. All right, so now some characteristics of Indian rice grass includes that it's a perennial bunch grass, perennial meaning that it will exist for a long or apparently infinite amount of time. So it's very long lived. And they can get between 1 to 2.5 feet tall. And their leaves are very identifiable because they're very straight, very skinny, and they're almost a tube-like shape. Also, they have branching panicles. Panicles are loose branching clusters of flowers. This can be seen in plants such as oats. And their seeds are also covered in black short hairs. All right, now they can be found in the Western United States. They are native to Western North America, and they can be found in east of the Cascades from British Columbia and Alberta, all the way down south to Southern California, northeastern Mexico, as well as Texas. They do like the soil to dry places, but they also will live in moist areas within drier environments, but they don't really seek out those moist environments. All right, and they are very well adapted to dry places. And since Nevada is actually the driest state in the United States, they do very well here as a native species. Now, Indian ricegrass is very important to Nevada as well as other states because they are able to reseed and establish themselves in areas that might have been disturbed. This could have been from fire, from overgrazing, or even from development, such as buildings. So they're able to reseed and kind of make these habitats healthy again. So they're very important. And for those environmental restoration projects that we do, because they will make a habitat healthy again. And they won't take quite as long as some other plants. Next, we have our state fish. Now, this is the Lahontan cutthroat trout. This was designated as our state fish in 1981, and in 1970, it was listed as endangered, but thankfully their population was able to increase, and they were reclassified in 1975 as threatened. Now, they were once one of the top predators within their habitat. However, they were overfished for a long period of time, which is why they became endangered. Luckily, some conservation work was done to try and increase their population, and they weren't fished quite as much. So their population was able to increase until they were reclassified as threatened. Now, some fun facts about the Lahontan cutthroat trout is that it's the current world record for the Lahontan cutthroat trout is 41 pounds. So they can get fairly large. It was actually believed that they used to get even larger before they started losing their habitat and they were being overfished. However, they can get pretty big still. Now, they are one of the 13 subspecies of cutthroat trout, and they are the largest of these cutthroat trout species. All right, so the Lahontan cutthroat trout has that red-orange slash mark along their throat. This is a good way of identifying it. You can also look for the black spots along their body, and they are also steel gray to olive green in coloring, and they vary in size. So lake trout tend to be bigger, but let's do a compare and contrast really quick. So we have the stream-dwelling Lahontan cutthroat trout, and then we also have the lake-dwelling Lahontan cutthroat trout. So the stream-dwelling Lahontan cutthroat trout, they tend to be a lot smaller at about 10 inches in length and 1 pound, whereas the lake dwellers, they will be about 50 inches and 40 pounds. So they get a lot bigger. And then the stream dwellers, they have a much shorter life expectancy at less than 5 years of age. And the lake dwellers will range from 5 to 14 years of age. Now, stream dwellers, their diet consists of terrestrial as well as aquatic insects, and lake dwellers, because they're larger, they can look for bigger sources of food. So they will look for terrestrial, aquatic insects, and smaller fish. Now they do prefer those colder weather or colder waters, and their habitat ranges from high mountain creeks and alpine lakes to warm lowland streams and alkaline lakes. So these are areas where no other trout can live, but they are native to the Lahontan Basin, and which consists of the northern Nevada, northeastern California, southeastern Oregon, and they are found in 14 of Nevada's 17 counties. So you can look for these state fish in a range of areas throughout Nevada. Now, the Lahontan cutthroat trout has many important adaptations that allow it to survive in these conditions. First off, they eat insects and smaller fish, so they eat what's available to them and what they can catch within their habitat. Also, their gills are very important for filtering oxygen, and this means that they don't have to come up to the water's surface quite as much to get oxygen, which would leave them vulnerable to predators. So they want to stay under the water for as long as they can, and these gills help them to do that. They will also migrate to spawn. Migrating is whenever fish will migrate upriver, often to spawn, spawning being depositing eggs or sperm directly into the water. So this provides our next generation of Lahontan cutthroat trout, which is very important. So we want to make sure that they are able to do this. And healthy Lahontan cutthroat trout should be able to do this because of their adaptations. They also have very powerful fins, and this helps them to travel long distances and travel against the current. And each of these fins that they have along their body provides a different component for it. So some of these are to help it balance within the water. So whenever it's swimming, it's very important that it does stay balanced and upright. And some of these other fins are to provide them power for whenever they are swimming those long distances. So to give them kind of some extra strength. Now let's start off with our first state tree. So we're going to talk about the single leaf pinyon pine. You can spell it two different ways. It doesn't really matter, just whichever you prefer. But these were designated as the first of our state trees in 1953. They're very slow growing. They will reach ages of more than 600 years. And some of the tribal pinyon gathering sites have been visited for many generations. So this is a very culturally important tree. And they are also drought tolerant. So a lot of our native species within Nevada, they are considered drought tolerant, so they won't catch on fire quite as quickly as some invasive and non-native plants will, which is why the best flame retardant that you could use for our habitats in preventing those wildfires is promoting our native plant species. So this is a very important native plant species that we do have here, and it's very useful for kind of reestablishing the health within those environments. All right, so some fun facts about this tree is that Native Americans traditionally harvested pinyon tree nuts. As a family, they would often collect the seeds from the ground, and then these seeds can be roasted or eaten raw. So if you do want to go out and gather some of these pine nuts, you can do this and you can eat them either way. But they have many uses. Native Americans also would steep the pinyon pine needles for tea, and the inner bark can be used to ward off starvation as well. And it's also very important for our wildlife populations. Birds, black bears, chipmunks, mule deer, quail, squirrels really rely on the pinyon seeds for food, and the pinyon seed or the single leaf pinyon pine also relies on these animals to carry these seeds to new locations and kind of have that next generation of trees. So it's very important and very interactive with wildlife populations and with their environment. And again, their lifespan, they can be over 600 years old. So they can grow to be very, very old. However, they are very compacted. So even smaller trees can be very old. Now, single leaf pinyon pines have many characteristics. First off, they are aromatic, so they smell very nice. If you want a stronger scent, you can crush up some of the needles and smell it that way. That's probably the easiest way to go, especially if you don't have a very good sense of smell. Now, the needles are very short and stiff. You can see this in the picture. And they also have very gnarled branches, so very kind of knobby, rough and twisted branches. Now, they will reach about 15 feet on average, but they can grow to be about 50 feet. Also, their habitat and range, typically they are the predominant tree species. You see this often in Nevada. They will kind of take over an area, which is a great thing. Now, they take about 2.5 billion feet of Nevada, so they take up a lot of the state of Nevada. So they're very important, and they can often be found in coarse rocky soils and rocky crevices. So they inhabit a lot of area that some other native species and some other plants might have a hard time inhabiting. But they inhabit southern Idaho, western Utah, northwestern Arizona, Nevada, eastern and central California, as well as northern Baja California. Next, we have our state bird. Now, this is the mountain bluebird. This was designated as our state bird in 1967. It is considered protected by the Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act, as well as Nevada state law. Now, this is due to a loss of available nesting sites, which has been the most significant factor affecting Nevada's mountain bluebirds. So we want to make sure that their population is able to stabilize. So they do need to be protected. And the Migratory Bird Treaty Act prohibits the taking of or using of protected migratory bird species without prior authorization by the Department of Interior, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So they are protected, and but they can be found in Nevada in some of the montane habitats and some other areas. All right, so some fun facts that we have here about the mountain bluebird is that it is related to robins. You can kind of see this in the body structure, and they are viewed as a sacred symbol because of their blue coloring. So they're viewed as a sacred symbol by many Native Americans in the Southwest, and the Navajo regarded them as a herald of the rising sun and the image of God, kind of. All right, now the mountain bluebird, although they are known for their blue coloring, this is only seen with the males. The females tend to be a brown coloring with bluish rump, tail, and wings. And this is that way they can kind of camouflage into their environment better, especially whenever they're nesting. It's important that they're able to camouflage and avoid predators that way. With the males, they're often this bright coloring because they want to attract the females. So this is why they're different colorings. Now, both of these, you can identify them from a distance by looking for those hunched shoulders whenever they're perched, and also they will often point their bills downward. Now, juveniles, they will often be seen in a different posture, and their wings and tail tend to be a paler blue coloring. So juveniles, they will develop into their coloration. All right, size. Now they aren't too big. They tend to be around 6 inches in length, and they will only weigh about 1 ounce. It can be found in Western United States, north to southern Canada, and south to Mexico. Now, in summertime, they will tend to stay at elevations of 5,000 feet. In late summer, though, they will reach elevations of up to 12,000 feet. And in the wintertime, they will stay in valleys and at sea level. So it just depends on which season you are looking for these and which area you want to go to. Now, they have many adaptations, although they look very small and delicate. They are able to avoid predators in many different ways. Now, they often will travel in flocks, and they will forage in these flocks during the winter time. And this is to look out for predators as well as to look out for food. So whenever they have more eyes on these things, they can better avoid those predators and better able or better find food, especially during the winter whenever food might not be quite as available. Now their diet consists of insects and seeds, and these little guys are very quick and they have very good eyesight. So they are able to catch these insects mid-flight, and you will often see them hovering over the ground and flying down to capture these insects. All right, and their feathers are probably one of their most important adaptations. They allow them to fly long distances. They also provide warmth for them, especially during the winter time. And they are also water resistant, so they can travel in different climate and environmental conditions without being too stressed. All right, now I'm going to include the sound for this living state symbol because it's often very important to listen for the sounds if you do want to track down these birds, especially bird species, which might fly away very quickly. If you listen out for these calls, you're better able to find them than maybe looking out for them. All right, but they are generally silent except for at dawn. And at dawn, they will sing this soft warbling whistling song. So if you listen for these, you can often find these birds, especially during the winter time. If they are traveling in flocks, you might see a couple of them. And you can look for these sounds online. I know there's many different resources that provide vocal patterns and sounds of these birds and a lot of other native birds. All right, next we have our state insect, which is the vivid dancer damselfly. This is another bright blue living state symbol that people often recognize. This is probably one of the most common ones that students are able to recognize, and they will often see this. They might not recognize the name, but they often recognize this as an important insect within Nevada because it's very common. Now, this was designated as our state insect in 2009, and it was actually voted on a fourth grade class taught taught at John R. Beatty Elementary School, offered their essay and testimony to have this state insect officiated. So this was kind of voted on, and it was decided by a class who was able to write a good enough essay that it was realized that this was a very important and valuable state insect. All right, so the damselfly is often confused with dragonflies. I know they look very similar. However, the damselfly is much smaller than the typical dragonfly. I'm using the green darner dragonfly as an example. Obviously, there's many different types of dragonfly, so so you really need to look at the vivid dancer damselfly and kind of see the specific characteristics to make sure that you aren't confusing it with another dragonfly. But they are often much smaller and they will grow to about 1.5 to 2 inches in length, whereas the dragonfly will grow to about 3 inches in length. And you can look at the wing position to kind of determine whether it's a damselfly or a dragonfly. With the damselfly, they will often fold their wings up straight on top of their body, whereas the dragonfly, they typically will position their wings on the sides whenever they are resting. So you can look for these different features. Also, another easy way to distinguish them is just knowing and realizing that the dragonfly is going to be much broader than the damselfly. They tend to have a thicker and broader body overall. Now, some fun facts about the vivid dancer damselfly is that the adults will tend to fly between April 15th to October 25th. So this is the best time to look for them. And this is when you're going to be able to find them more easily than some other times, especially since they spend a lot of their life underwater. So you might not be able to see them or recognize them whenever they are in that period of their life. Now, males will set up territories and they will often try and set up their territories in the best breeding sites available to them. Now, the males, have that bright blue coloring. They're often recognized for that bright blue coloring. However, Females tend to be more of a tannish color, but they do both have similar patterns along their body. So this is how you can kind of tell that this is a damselfly, especially a vivid dancer damselfly. Also, both have clear wings. All right, and they are found in eastern British Columbia and Alberta, all the way down south to Texas, New Mexico, Baja California, and Idaho. But they can be found in all 4 regions of Nevada, especially near springs and ponds, and they will peak in late August. So that's the best time to look for them. Now, the vivid dancer damselfly probably has the most interesting adaptations to me. They have these incredible compound eyes, which have 30,000 lenses in each of these eyes. So can't really tell from this image, but they have very small lenses that give them incredible vision. And this is very important for looking out for predators as well as for spotting prey. They also have very bristly legs. You can see it in this picture, but these bristles allow them to hold on to their prey. So they will often catch their prey mid-flight, and these bristles allow them to hold on even whenever they are flying. Now they also have veins in their wings, and these veins strengthen the wings, and they also give them flexibility. So they can maneuver very well and at very fast speeds. So they are incredible predators. Even though they are very small, they're very quick, they're very strong, and they're just very well adapted to their environment and to capturing smaller insects and prey. Next, we have our state flower. Now, our state flower is sagebrush. This was designated in 1917 as our state flower, and it is a member of the sunflower family Asteraceae. Also, some common names you might have heard include big sagebrush, common sagebrush, blue sagebrush, and black sagebrush. So why is this plant familiar? Well, it's on Nevada's flag. You can see it in this image, and it has also been mentioned in Nevada's state song. So if you learn this song whenever you were younger, you might be able to recognize or be familiar with sagebrush. Now, sagebrush, it reaches a height of 3 to 12 feet, and in late summer and early fall, it will start flowering. And it also has those silver leaves, which will be coarse and hardy. And it also has recognizable inflorescences, which are a pale yellow color. Now, what is an inflorescence? Well, an inflorescence is a cluster of flowers. Often it's just many smaller flowers that will group together and form one large flower. So this is our state flower. It might not be a traditional flower, but it is our flower. Now, also a single flowering stem will have hundreds of flowering heads. So it has many small flowers that group together. And although you might not be able to see those small flowers from a distance, they are very beautiful and a bright yellow, sometimes a pale yellow, depending on when you are looking at these, but they will eventually dry out and become a kind of brownish coloring. All right, so they are a large part of Nevada's ecosystem. They are considered one of our main habitats. And sagebrush ecosystems are the largest interconnected habitat in the United States. So they are very important to us. They stretch from Washington, east to the Dakotas, south to California, Arizona, as well as New Mexico. And due to Nevada's dry climate, the soil is very sandy. It cannot hold a lot of water very well. Again, this is the driest state in the United States, so everything has to be well adapted to those conditions. And sagebrush does a very, very good job of this. This area makes the perfect condition for the sagebrush to really thrive. All right. So they are also very important. They're economically important, not only for maintaining our healthy habitats, but also for promoting our wildlife species. And a lot of farmers in Nevada rely on livestock being able to graze free range. So sagebrush provides a lot of important food sources for wildlife as well as for livestock. So they're very important for wildlife, not only for the food, but also as nesting cover. They provide escape cover for sage-grouse, sharp-tailed grouse, pheasants, and chukar, and other upland birds. And in the winter time, even though a lot of area is covered in snow, sometimes you will see little divots in the snow. And this is because sagebrush really retains a lot of heat and starts melting the snow around it. And animals will look out for this. And because this is an evergreen plant, it still has its leaves during the winter time. And animals will feed off of this plant and also find shelter within this plant. So it's very important for our wildlife here in Nevada and many other areas. Nearly 100 bird species do depend on sagebrush ecosystems for their habitat needs. A lot of our bigger wildlife, such as mule deer, black-tailed deer, elk, pronghorn antelope, and so on, they also rely on sagebrush habitat being healthy and being able to sustain them during the winter periods and throughout the year, really. All right, now our state tree, this is our second state tree. This is the bristlecone pine tree. This was designated in 1987. Some common names that you might have heard it being called include wind timber, hickory pine, crumholtz, and foxtail pine. So it has many different names. So again, if you want to research this later on, definitely encourage you using the scientific name. All right, so some fun facts about this tree is that it is among the oldest living organisms on Earth. It is the oldest non-clonal tree, however. It almost gets that record of the oldest living organism. However, the pando is a clonal organism, which is the oldest organism on Earth. So clonal meaning it creates exact copies of itself, and it can do this through its root system. And the pando is actually a quaking aspen stand, which is the oldest clonal organism that we know of. All right, so some specimens in Nevada are actually over 4,000 years old. So if you do want to look for these trees, some of these trees might be incredibly old, even though they might not look it. All right, so the oldest tree that we know of is called the Methuselah. It is 4,765 years old. Incredibly old. It's seen a lot in its lifetime. Often these trees, they will start looking very old. This is not a picture of the Methuselah, but many of these trees will start looking like this tree you see here. But the oldest known tree was called the Prometheus. It was accidentally cut down in 1964, obviously on purpose, but accidentally because they didn't realize its importance. It was cut down by a doctoral student who was studying climate change and how it related to the growth rings along the tree and how that tree would have survived over that time period. However, they accidentally killed the tree, and because of that, it was cut down. But it is believed to be about 4,900 years old based on those growth rings. So the bristlecone pine tree has many different characteristics. Of course, the gnarled and weather-beaten look that it has is easy to distinguish from many other trees that might not have lived as long. So they're a very resilient tree. And they experience a lot of different climate changes and a lot of different environmental conditions over their lifetime. Now, older trees will be about 15 to 30 feet tall. Sometimes they can reach about 60 feet tall, though, just depending on the environmental conditions that it's experiencing. Now, they will often die in portions. This is part of the reason why they look so rough, is because they will die off in sections as the roots become exposed, and those roots end up drying up, and those portions of the tree will end up dying as well. Now, the diameter growth will continue throughout its lifetime, resulting in a massive trunk with a few contorted limbs. It has many contorted limbs, as you can see in this picture with this tree. But that's a good way of kind of looking out for them, is just looking for a very, very thick diameter and a very thick trunk, and then those contorted limbs. Even if they might not have any leaves, you can still distinguish them by looking for those characteristics. Now, they usually inhabit high elevations ranging from 6,500 feet to 11,000 feet. And they prefer those exposed, dry, rocky slopes and ridges. And the range includes California, Nevada, and Utah. So again, this is an example of a living state symbol that you can go out yourself and find. And these are incredible just because of their age and because of what they have gone through. I mean, imagine going through all of those environmental conditions and still being alive today. All right, so we've gone over our 9 living state symbols. We went over the vivid dancer damselfly, the desert tortoise, bristlecone pine tree, our mountain bluebird, single leaf pinyon pine tree, the Lahun cutthroat trout, the desert bighorn sheep, Indian ricegrass, and sagebrush. So we went over a lot of living state symbols that are unique and very important to our state and our overall biodiversity. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to put in the box or the comment box and we can go over those.
All right, Ava, we don't have any questions just yet, but we did have a couple of comments about some of the sightings that they'd seen. Emily said that she had seen 2 rams near the Walker River Eastern Fork. And then we had a couple comments about the mountain bluebird. One was from Terrence, said that they had mountain bluebird males in Southwest Louisiana in the fall, and that there was a female about 90 minutes east, as well as a mountain bluebird in Minneapolis this year. So they said absolutely gorgeous bird, and they were super thrilled to see them, which I am too. Every time I see them, I get pretty excited. Danielle said she saw one in the park. And Terry asked if there's some way we can attract mountain bluebirds to our yards.
So the only thing I can think of is putting out seed for the mountain bluebirds, or just having a healthy habitat. If you do have some native plants and maybe wildlife within your area, then the birds might come to your area. But other than that, it's hard to kind of specify which birds will come into your area.
I know I'm working really hard on that in my backyard too. And every once in a while I get lucky, but not on a regular basis.
They're so unpredictable sometimes, especially birds.
Yeah. Another comment that there are lots of mountain bluebirds in their neighborhood. So maybe T, you need to tell us what your secret is.
And definitely, if you've seen some of these living state symbols, put it in the comment. It's always interesting to see what people have seen.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no secrets. They're just there. You're lucky, huh? Yeah. Mark said, seen the bighorn sheep in Hemingway Park in Boulder City. Yep, that is a super popular place for them. Emily says the birds really like the juniper berries, which is true. Oh, yes, definitely. All right. Do we have any other questions coming in or other comments?
Give it another minute.
All right. All right. Well, I don't see any. Oh, maybe we do. Oh, another comment about bighorn sheep in the mountains that was seen. Okay. And in the Valley of Fire at the campground.
Oh, good.
Pretty common areas to see them. I need to go down there and see them more often.
All right. So is that it for the Q&A then?
I think it might be, we did get one last comment from T who says he's got lots of black or bluebirds in their yard, but they have lots of trees back there as well. And so maybe that's the secret, is lots of trees.
Yeah, definitely promoting that healthy habitat that they're attracted to. That's probably one of the best ways that you can do it. It might take the longest, especially if you're in a disturbed area, but sometimes it's just luck too, and whether you're going to see some of these living state symbols.
You did just get another question about the desert tortoise and how long they can live without food.
For food, I am not quite as certain. I know for water, they can live about a year without fresh water, just because they recycle the water and they get a lot of their water from their food that they do eat. So I would imagine food maybe not quite as long, just because they need water from their food also. So it's they kind of get both from their food. So it's important that they have food, a good food source.
Okay, I think that might be it.
All right. So thank you for joining me today. It's great to see that people are interested and made comments and have seen a lot of these living state symbols here. But what I want you to do is go out and embrace the outdoors. Go out and enjoy some of Nevada's unique biodiversity. Maybe you'll be able to identify some of these living state symbols whenever you do go out. Maybe you'll find some new biodiversity or something new to see. But you'll always find something different whenever you do go outdoors and exploring some of Nevada's unique ecosystems. But also, even if you aren't in Nevada, you'll always see something new whenever you go outdoors. So thank you all for joining me today. And I hope you learned a lot, but have a great rest of your day.